The quiet moment I knew my husband took me for granted did not come during an argument. It did not come with raised voices or hurtful words. It came while I was standing alone in our kitchen, holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I had just finished cleaning up after dinner, the same way I had done almost every night for years. The plates were stacked. The lights were dim. My husband sat in the living room, his back turned to me, watching something on his phone. I stood there for a moment, waiting. Not for attention. Just for acknowledgement. I cleared my throat softly. Nothing. I said his name. Once. Then again. He didn't hear me. Or maybe he did, and didn't think it mattered. That was the moment. Not dramatic. Not loud. Just painfully clear. I had spent years supporting him, adjusting my life around his needs, his goals, his stress. I had done it quietly, believing love meant sacrifice without keeping score. But standing there, holding that cold cup of tea, I felt something settle inside me. I felt invisible. Not unloved. Not rejected. Just unseen. I smiled to myself, the way I always did. I told myself he was tired, busy, distracted. I had made excuses for him so many times. They came naturally. But that night, when I went to bed and lay beside him, listening to his steady breathing, my heart felt heavy in a way I couldn't ignore. I wondered when it started. When I became part of the background of his life instead of part of the picture. I remembered how he used to look at me when we were younger. How he asked my opinion. How he thanked me for small things. Somewhere along the way, my presence became expected instead of appreciated. And the hardest truth of all was this. He didn't do it on purpose. He simply got used to me always being there. Always being strong. Always understanding. That quiet moment in the kitchen was when I realized something important. When you give without asking, people forget the cost. This is the story of how I supported my husband for years. And how, in doing so, I slowly disappeared. Before life became quiet in the wrong way, it was quiet in a peaceful way. When I met my husband, we were both still learning who we were. We did not have much. But we had time, hope, and the kind of love that feels simple because nothing has weighed it down yet. He had dreams that were bigger than his confidence. He talked about work, success, and building a life where he would never feel small again. When he spoke, I listened with care. I believed in him before the world did. That felt important to me. I had my own dreams too, but they were softer. I wanted a home that felt warm, a marriage that felt safe, a life where we could grow together. In the beginning, we talked about everything. Long walks, late nights, plans that felt endless. When he struggled, I stood beside him. When he doubted himself, I reminded him of his strength. I didn't see it as sacrifice back then. I saw it as love. We built our life step by step. A small home at first, second-hand furniture, simple meals. I learned how to stretch money, how to make a place feel full even when it wasn't. When he worked long hours, I adjusted my schedule. When stress followed him home, I absorbed it quietly. I became good at making things easier for him. Too good. People praised him for his effort. They said he was driven, focused, hardworking. I smiled and stood just a little behind him. I didn't need praise. I just wanted to feel included. As time passed, his career grew. Opportunities came. Responsibilities increased. Our home grew bigger. But the space between us did too. I noticed the change slowly. Conversations became shorter. Decisions became quicker. He didn't ask my opinion the way he used to. Not because he was unkind, but because he assumed my agreement. I stayed quiet because it felt easier. I told myself this was just a busy season, that things would slow down again. I became the one who remembered everything. Appointments, birthdays, details of daily life. I held everything together without being asked, without being thanked. At first it felt normal. Then it felt expected. I stopped sharing my thoughts the way I used to. I stopped talking about my own wishes. Not because he told me to, but because there never seemed to be room. Still, I loved him. And love made me patient. I told myself that being supportive meant being strong. being flexible, being quiet when needed. I did not realize that silence, when it lasts too long, becomes distance. There were moments I wanted to speak, moments I wanted to say, "I need you too." But I swallowed those words. I didn't want to add pressure, didn't want to seem demanding. I believed that if I kept giving, love would notice. I didn't understand, yet, that love also needs reminding. By the time I started feeling tired in a way rest couldn't fix, our roles were already set. He moved forward. I made the path smooth. And slowly, without anyone meaning to, I became part of the background of the life we built together. The change did not arrive suddenly. It slipped in quietly, through ordinary days. At first, I barely noticed it. Life was busy. Responsibilities filled our time. But slowly, moments that once felt warm began to feel empty. We used to talk in the evenings. About our day. About small things that made us laugh. Now, evenings passed with the television on and our phones in hand. Words became fewer. Silence became normal. I would ask him how work was. He would say, "It was fine," and move on. I waited for more. It rarely came. Sometimes I shared something from my own day. A thought. A worry. He listened with half attention. Nodded. Then changed the subject. I told myself not to be sensitive. Everyone gets tired. Everyone has stress. But inside, something felt off. I noticed how decisions were made quickly now. Plans were set without conversation. Trips were scheduled without asking if the timing worked for me. Once, he told me about a meeting he had agreed to attend on a weekend we had planned to spend together. He spoke casually, like it was nothing. I smiled and said it was okay. Later that night, I lay awake, wondering why I hadn't spoken up, why my own plans always felt easier to move aside. There were moments when I felt like a helper instead of a partner, someone who made things run smoothly in the background. I cooked his favorite meals. I handled the house. I listened when he talked about his worries. But when I needed comfort, I hesitated. I didn't want to interrupt his thoughts, didn't want to add to his load. So I carried my feelings quietly. One evening, I dressed up a little. Nothing special, just enough to feel nice. He walked past me and asked where his keys were. That was all. I stood there, holding a small smile that faded quickly. Not because he didn't compliment me, but because he didn't notice me at all. Another time, I asked him if we could spend a day together. Just the two of us. He said, "Maybe next week," without looking up. Next week came and went. I told myself he didn't mean to forget. I made excuses for him, because it felt easier than facing disappointment. But the truth was, I felt lonely even when he was right beside me. I began to feel like my role was to support, not to share. To adjust, not to ask. I started choosing silence more often. It felt safer. But silence has a cost. I stopped feeling excited about sharing things, stopped expecting warmth. I became careful with my words, careful with my needs. And slowly, the woman I used to be began to fade. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was tired. Tired of always understanding. Tired of being strong. I still loved him deeply. That made everything harder, because loving someone who doesn't fully see you feels like standing in a room with the lights slowly going out. And even then, I believed it would change. That one day he would notice. I didn't yet know that the quiet moments were leading towards something I could no longer ignore. There is always a moment. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just quiet enough to break something inside you. For me, it came on an ordinary afternoon. The sky was gray. Rain tapped softly against the windows. The house felt still. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sorting old papers, bills, receipts, things that had been ignored for too long. I found an old card tucked between the pages. It was from years ago, from him. He had written how grateful he was, how he couldn't do life without me, how I was his strength. I read it slowly. Then I read it again. My chest tightened, not with happiness, but with confusion, because that man felt far away now. I heard the door open. He came in, shaking rain from his jacket. I held the card in my hand. I don't know why, but I asked, "Do you still feel this way about me?" He paused. Not long. Just long enough. Then he said, "Of course." "Why are you asking?" His voice was kind, but distant. I wanted to explain. I wanted to tell him about the loneliness, about the silence, about how invisible I felt. But the words didn't come out right. Instead, I said softly, "I feel like I don't matter anymore." He sighed. Not angrily, just tired. And then he said the words that changed everything. "You're overthinking. Everything is fine. You're just always here, so I don't think about it." Always here. The words fell between us like something heavy. Not cruel, not meant to hurt, but they landed deep. Always here. I smiled. I nodded. But inside, something cracked. Because in that moment I understood. My presence had become background noise. My effort had become expected. My love had become invisible. I wasn't appreciated. I was assumed. He walked away to take a call. His voice returned to its usual tone. Focused. Engaged. I stayed at the table. The rain grew louder. I thought about all the times I had adjusted myself. All the times I had waited. All the times I had put my needs last. I realized something painful. He didn't take me for granted because he was unkind. He took me for granted because I allowed it. I had taught him that I would always be there, no matter how quiet I became, no matter how much I disappeared. Tears came, but slowly, silently. Not the kind that demand attention, the kind that accept truth. That night, we ate dinner quietly. The clink of plates felt louder than words. He talked about his day. I listened like always. But something was different. I wasn't shrinking anymore. I was waking up. Later, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling. I felt calm, sad but clear. I loved him. That hadn't changed. But I finally understood that love without presence is not enough. Care without recognition slowly becomes pain. And I asked myself a question I had been avoiding for years. What happens to a woman when she is always there, but never truly seen? That question stayed with me. It followed me into sleep, and into the days that came after. Because once you see the truth, you cannot unsee it. After that night, nothing changed on the outside. The house looked the same. The routine stayed in place. But inside me, something had shifted. I moved through the days, more slowly. Not tired, just thoughtful. I noticed things I had ignored before. How often I said yes without thinking. How often I softened my words to keep peace. I realized how much of myself I had folded away. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. I looked at my face, the lines, the eyes that had seen so much. I whispered, "You're still here." It felt strange to say it out loud, but it also felt true. I started doing small things differently. Nothing dramatic, nothing loud. I stopped rushing to fix everything. If something was left undone, I let it be. If he forgot something, I didn't remind him right away. Not to punish. Just to step back. At first, it felt uncomfortable. Like I was breaking a rule I had lived by for years. One evening, he noticed the quiet. "You're different lately," he said. "Are you upset with me?" I shook my head. "No," I said. "I'm just listening to myself." He looked confused. I didn't explain further. Because this wasn't about him understanding yet. It was about me understanding myself. I spent more time alone. Not lonely time. Peaceful time. I walked in the mornings. I sat by the window in the afternoons. I let my thoughts settle. I remembered the woman I was before I became only a wife. Before I became only support. I remembered that I had dreams too. Quiet ones. But real. One night, I finally spoke. We were sitting at the table, just the two of us. The room was calm. I said, "I've been feeling invisible for a long time." He didn't interrupt. I continued slowly. "I don't need grand gestures. I just need to be seen." The silence was heavy, but not sharp. He looked at me differently then. Not defensive. Just thoughtful. "I didn't know," he said. And maybe that was true. But I also knew something else. Even if he hadn't known, I had known. And I had ignored it. That realization didn't make me angry. It made me gentle with myself. Change didn't come overnight. It came in small moments. He started asking instead of assuming. I started answering honestly. Some days were awkward. Some days were quiet. But the silence was no longer empty. It was aware. I learned something important during that time. Being taken for granted doesn't always come from cruelty. Sometimes it comes from comfort, from habit, from never being asked to notice. And being forgotten often starts when we forget ourselves. I didn't stop loving him. I didn't walk away. But I stepped back into my own space. I stopped disappearing. And in that space, I felt something new. Respect. First for myself. That was the beginning. Not of an ending, but of a more honest way of living. Time has a way of softening things. Not by erasing pain, but by helping us understand it. As weeks passed, I noticed how different I felt inside. Not lighter, exactly, but steadier. I no longer waited to be noticed to feel real. I no longer measured my worth by how useful I was. Some mornings, I still made his tea. Some evenings, I still folded his clothes. But now, I did these things by choice. Not by habit. Not by fear of being needed. There is a difference. One afternoon, I found an old photo. It was tucked inside a drawer I rarely opened. A picture of us when we were young. I studied my face in that photo. The way I stood. The quiet confidence I had before life asked me to shrink. I smiled gently. Not with sadness. With recognition. She was still me. I realized something important in that moment. Love should not require you to disappear. Care should not mean silence. And loyalty should never cost you your voice. If you are listening to this and you feel unseen, please hear this slowly. You do not need to become louder to matter. You do not need to suffer quietly to prove love. And you do not need permission to take up space. Sometimes, the most powerful change happens without noise, without anger, without walking away. It happens when you pause, when you listen to your own heart, when you stop abandoning yourself. My husband still has his habits. I still have mine. But now, when I speak honestly. And when I am quiet, it is because I am at peace, not because I feel small. That quiet moment I once feared, the moment I knew I was being taken for granted, it did not break me. It woke me. And waking up was the greatest gift I could give myself. If there is one lesson I carry forward, it is this. Never wait for someone else to see your worth. See it first. Treat it gently. Protect it. Because the woman who builds the home deserves to feel at home too. Thank you for listening. And if this story felt familiar, I hope it reminds you to choose yourself with kindness, with courage,